Deep in the night, shadows danced under the flickering glow of candelabras. The theater hummed with life in a dense gloom, a space where whispers of secrets and muffled laughter intertwined. With a tray in hand, I moved like a ghost among nobles and strangers, trying to ignore the scornful glances that sometimes drifted my way. But that night, the air felt different. A heavy anticipation hung, as if something monumental was about to unfold. He entered, the prince, an almost mythical figure who inhabited the court's quietest conversations and dreams. Immediately, the chatter ceased. He wasn't just a name on the lips of the nobility, but a reality incarnate, visibly out of place in that room of pretense and hypocrisy. His gaze, which should have shone with the promising light of a glorious future, bore a different kind of silence, that of rejection. The soft clink of my tray against the ornate table was almost an announcement, drawing his attention. Our eyes met, and in an instant the room seemed to spin. When I accidentally spilled the drink on his table, the world around us faded. Our contact, however brief, made my heart race, as if a lightning bolt had pierced the fragile atmosphere of those walls. An intense glow shut up my arm, and a deep echo reverberated in my mind. The ancestral ring on my finger, always worn without a second thought, pulsed with an unknown energy. The court around us, unable to see beyond their own avarice, laughed at his difference. The prince's deafness wasn't just a personal trait. It was a shackle the court forged around him, frequently whispering he'd never be their king. I felt a lump in my throat as I witnessed the arrogance of the noble voices, those mouths that recited verses of scorn, while true worth hid in the shadows. But there was something more, something that compelled me to observe. It was the lack of true support, of a voice that would rise in his defense. Every silence cries out for a voice, echoed in my mind, a mantra that had long accompanied me. That phrase became a seal on my heart. The prince was a victim of what he couldn't control. And, in some inexplicable way, I found myself immersed in his conflicts, intertwined in a struggle that wasn't solely his. As the night dragged on, the idea took root within me. If the court didn't want him, if each of its nobles was ready to ignore his worth and true essence, I could be the voice he lacked. Hope ignited like a small flame in a labyrinth of darkness. My status didn't matter. The fight against injustice called. I would follow that path, even if it meant challenging the very foundations of the court. My firm steps moved away from the commotion as I decided that a change was necessary. I needed to uncover the truth hidden behind the palace's unforgiving walls. Curiosity, determination, and an unexplained whisper of courage began to guide me, and the night was just beginning. That prince's silence would no longer remain unshaken, not as long as I could fight. The sun set, fading into a horizon painted in purple and orange as I headed back to the theater, now just a distant echo of the previous night's turmoil. The embrace of darkness was a relief. The bond uniting me with the prince grew clearer with each step I took. The theater walls were silent witnesses to contained emotions. But the memories of what I witnessed at court continued to hammer in my mind, each cruel laugh echoing like a clamor of injustice. Flashbacks began to emerge, revealing a past that shaped both me and the prince. I remembered feeling small, invisible, among those who held power. My life changed when an old guardian, almost as invisible as I, revealed the magic behind touch to me. In her presence, my gift blossomed, not just a touch, but a channel to truth. By touching people's hearts, I could delve into their souls. But at court, this ability became a curse. The prince, perpetually surrounded by scornful glances, was forced to face his own distorted reflection. I recalled the feasts where words danced like venomous snakes, entangling any hope that tried to sprout for him. The nobles received orders on how to treat the heir who would never inherit, always courteous but always ironically scornful. The whispers surrounding the impending coronation became a constant drone, swelling deep within me. They spun a narrative suggesting he could never be considered for the crown. The coronation ceremonies were designed to celebrate him, but the echoes of whispered contempt were clear. A deaf prince is an unfit prince resonated through the corridors when they spoke aloud, but I knew the hidden weight, the pain of bearing a burden that wasn't his. I connected each memory to the idea of every word that was spoken and that he would never hear. The pages of history were being written without him. As I walked through the theater corridors, I spotted a group of young waitstaff, just like me, who also knew the pain of being ignored. Each of them bore their own story, but the connection with the prince bordered on destiny. The moment arrived when I decided these echoes of rejection were more sinister than they appeared. I knew I needed to do more than observe. I had to act. I called the other waitstaff to a meeting, revealing what I had witnessed. They were the voices from the shadows, and the touch we shared as ingenious individuals could very well ignite a revolution. Our conversations grew fervent, the heat of determination igniting our shared silence. We knew what was coming was immensely dangerous. Facing the powerful was an act of courage that could cost us our place in the shadows. But if we didn't, who would dare write the true worth of the prince? I couldn't just be the girl who observed. We needed to join forces. Every silence cries out for a voice. The phrase had become a silent cry in our unity. And so, under the flickering light of the lamps, we decided that the destiny of the crown was not lost, for each of us had an individual power that could transform into a unified cry. The bond was forming, and I knew our touch could be the safe haven the prince, one day, had also sought. So I left the room that day with renewed hopes. The moment of truth was approaching. As each actor took their place on stage, I prepared for the role I never imagined taking on. The days that followed became a blend of vigilance and strategy, each movement meticulously calculated. Within the theater, life continued at its usual pace, but behind the curtain, something profound was taking root. The other waitstaff and I gathered fragments of information, whispered words in the dark, transforming into silent weapons. We communicated our discoveries between rehearsals, and the tension was thicker than the very air heavy with spirits. Networks of support began to form, each of us willing to risk everything for a greater purpose. But amidst the construction of this plan, I realized it wasn't just the prince we had to protect, but a future that depended on our courage. It was in one of these clandestine meetings that a young woman named Ilara stood out. She, with a sharp gaze and an untamed spirit, shared what she had once overheard in a conversation between nobles. The traitorous advisor, operating like a wolf in sheep's clothing, was plotting something that could compromise the prince and his future in the kingdom. A line of decision was drawn, and determination resonated in our hearts. We could not only help our prince, but also dismantle the advisor's plans. Coronation night drew near with rapid strides, and with it a window of opportunity opened. If we could gather the silenced voices, we could make a cry resonate that would leave an indelible mark on history. The prince's words, until then swallowed by the deafness imposed upon him, could finally tear through the court's veil of indifference. Every silence cries out for a voice. These weren't just words, but a call to action. I began to search the palace corridors, the place where my life bore passive witness to the prince's struggle. At every corner, I looked at the faces of the powerful who seemed so sure of their empire of shadows. But I would not be intimidated. There was a hidden access to the royal library that I had never explored. That room, dusty and forgotten, held secrets that could change everything. Being able to enter that library was a step forward, and that night, with my heart pounding, I decided it was my destiny. I went there, remembering the connection I had with the other waitstaff. Each step represented a new bond, and as I passed through the tapestry-covered walls, I could visualize images of past generations, of distorted truths and untold stories. And then, in an isolated corner, I found a dusty journal belonging to an ancient advisor. The pages were filled with observations about the vampiric lineage and the rituals involving the coronation. A ray of hope illuminated my mind. It could very well prove what the prince needed to claim his place. However, the light of discovery soon darkened as it converged with the shadow of the traitorous advisor, who was drawing closer to his plan each day. Meanwhile, a sense of urgency grew with each passing moment among the others. Time was running out, and victory wouldn't be a denial of the prince. It was a pulsating reality fighting to be recognized. I couldn't allow dark forces to eclipse the hope we were beginning to plant. It was our time to act. Unraveling the palace's hidden truths wasn't just a mission. It transformed into the incessant beat that began to govern every fiber of my being. I understood that the prince's freedom wasn't just about royalty, but about the unity of voices crying out for a future where no one else would be silenced. The strength was in all our hands, and the call for change became a wave that could no longer be contained. With each passing day, the tension in the palace mounted as if the very atmosphere were about to explode. My rehearsals with the other waitstaff became a ritual where each fervent conversation solidified our purpose. The journal we found not only revealed secrets about the vampiric lineage, but also outlined a plan, our plan for coronation night, when everything would change. The approach of that night brought a mix of hope and fear. The prince, who had always been in the shadow of his deafness, needed to understand his crucial role in the unfolding plot. I decided to meet him in one of the palace's less frequented corridors, where the glow of candelabras barely illuminated the opulent tapestry-covered walls. He was there, looking more vulnerable than ever. The silent gaze in his eyes reflected a depth of understanding, an echo of what his words could never express. "We need you," I told him, determination shaping my voice. My heart beat with an accelerated rhythm, recognizing that he wasn't just a prince, but a symbol of hope for all of us. "Your voice is the essence we need to break the silence that imprisons us." The awareness of his power began to ignite. Now, more hopeful than before, he agreed. It was the decisive moment. During the coronation, we would make our voice echo, not just as an individual plea, but as a collective cry against the forces trying to silence him. As coronation night approached, the anxiety in the air became palpable. Noble robes were being prepared, and the ceremonialist prepared to raise him to the throne. But it wouldn't be an ordinary coronation, it would be a revelation. With the waitstaff by my side, we decided that at the height of the ceremony, we would unite our cries to expose the secrets the traitorous advisor had tried so hard to hide. Coronation Day arrived. The bright lights and opulence concealed the tension that pulsed behind the curtains. We positioned ourselves in the shadows of the hall, our gazes fixed on the prince. As the ceremony began, the nobles settled in, confident in their dominion over the realm, but little did they know what was about to unfold. As the ceremonialist uttered words of grandeur, I took the ancient rune from the journal and raised it, a sign of generations. A murmur of astonishment swept through the court, interrupting the solemnity. The royal lineage isn't just a bloodline, but a history of truths to be told. Our voices were aligned, and I felt the electricity in the air growing. The prince, in his grandeur, colored by the history he had fought to be heard, finally knew this was his moment. The circle formed, and the determination of everyone there pulsed, ready to confront the shadows and deceptions surrounding the crown. The freedom of that night wasn't just the prince's, it was ours. The time was coming, and the words of truth would erupt like a wave so strong that the shadows could not resist. The cry for recognition had become an unstoppable force, about to explode in the hall, bringing forth the hidden truths that would burst into light. Destiny was about to change. The murmur that spread through the court began as a ripple, but quickly transformed into a roar, the agitation swelling like a vast, turbulent sea. The nobles, initially stunned by the interruption, exchanged looks of disbelief and hostility, but we, allies in the shadows, felt a pulsating power emerging. The prince, once a silent spectator of his own destiny, now rose, his presence absorbing the silence and shaping itself into the voice emerging from his essence. "It is true," he declared, each word projecting a force that reverberated throughout the chamber like thunder breaking through a laden sky. "Every lineage carries not only privileges, but the responsibility to listen and to be heard. My silence never reflected an absence of voice, but the repression imposed upon me." The echo of his words resonated through the corridors, reverberating in our hearts. I watched, caught in the dance between fear and hope, as the ceremonialist tried to regain control of the ceremony, but it was too late. Our voices collectively formed a chorus of resistance. The truth, a sharp blade, was severing the chains that bound reality to constraint and darkness. "And you, advisor," I continued, addressing the man who had plotted so insidiously in the shadows, "hidden behind smiles and promises, you thought your betrayals would remain unexplored. But the truth shines, and it cannot be silenced." A tense silence formed, the words heavy among the people who before seemed so secure and dominant. The traitorous advisor, in an unparalleled moment, stood paralyzed, his expression of panic revealing the broader picture of what he had sown. The chimera of his power began to unravel before the inevitability of the revelation of his treacherous intentions. Every gaze turned to him, and feeling vulnerable, he tried to reverse the narrative.
But the resistance was forceful. The girls and I, in our unity, went beyond mere supporting figures. We were voices crying out for change. The prince looked at us and smiled, a glimmer of understanding passing between us. The cry for justice grew, an echo of indignation that could no longer be contained. "These are the secrets cultivated in the shadows," I continued, indicating the group of nobles who recoiled around us. "This quest for a pure bloodline takes the foundation of a crown and transforms innocence into an unbearable burden. This is not what this kingdom needs." The air was thick with tension, as if that moment could rupture the very essence that composed that palace. The initial murmur had become a frenzied outcry, and I knew we were about to cross the threshold of change. A new legion of voices could emerge from the obscurity, and the pulse of freedom resonated in our hearts. "Will they silence us?" the prince inquired, strong and clear. "Never again will we be invisible. First, the truth, then dominion. We cry for justice, and now it is our turn." With a fluid movement, he extended his hand. It was the foreseen connection that would unite not only the waitstaff, but the entire audience. Then the floor seemed to tremble beneath our feet, as if an ancestral force were unleashed. The advisor, in desperation, tried to approach the source of his power with a cruel smile, but the growing light of our unity was his sentence. "The truth cannot be stopped," the prince concluded, taking the decisive step. It was a turning point. The hall vibrated with the expectation of revelation. Hidden truths threatened to gush forth, and the future no longer seemed hazy. We were on the brink of change, and the kingdom's destiny hung in the balance between light and darkness, poised to break the cycle of oppression. The tension in the hall mounted like a thread about to snap. The traitorous advisor, now fully exposed, wavered between fear and rage, while the nobles exchanged confused glances. The order that had reigned in this palace began to crumble, and the truth finally manifested itself. "Do you think you can change history?" he shouted, his voice trembling. "Order is what holds us together, and you have no idea of the dangers this could bring." But his rhetoric only stirred more indignation among those present. The prince, once a mere spectator, now took his prominent place. His eyes shone with determination,
And each word uttered reverberated like a spell, strengthening the bond that began to form between him and those who now fought by his side. "The order you defend is a prison," he said, his tone firm. "Suffering is not sustainability. It's time to transform this crown into a symbol of hope." As he spoke, our unity grew stronger. Placing our hands together, we created a symbol of resistance. The light of our intentions became a beacon, illuminating the darkness accumulated in the palace. "Blood or not, all of us are part of this kingdom," I cried, feeling a wave of courage entering my being. "We fight for a legacy not based on inheritance, but on truth and justice. We need a new covenant, one that values every voice and every life." The advisor, now overcome by visible panic, tried to place himself between us and the truth. But the energy of the room was shifting. The murmurs became an outcry, a unified chorus that made the air palpable. Every person there seemed to feel the same determination, as if an ancestral force were awakening within us, demanding to be heard. The prince then raised his hand, requesting silence again. Unmasking lies is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of love for this kingdom. His words echoed through the walls, dismantling the illusions of control that had been carefully constructed. The traitorous advisor found himself cornered, surrounded not only by the audience, but by the truth that had been oppressed for so long. With bowed heads, the nobles began to hesitate. The destiny that seemed fixed in their hands now seemed to slip like sand through their fingers. I realized we were on the verge of a turning point, a crucial moment where the old would give way to the new. "The future is a collective creation," said the prince, his voice growing in volume. "And freedom begins here." A roar of approval rose, a sound that resonated through the walls like the promise of a new era. The palace, a symbol of oppression, became the stage for the revelation. We stood side by side, ready to confront not just a traitorous advisor, but a system that had sustained itself for too long. The floor still trembled beneath our feet, foretelling that change was about to happen, an avalanche of transformation that could no longer be stopped. And so, with courage pulsing in our veins, we moved forward together into the unknown. The future awaited, filled with promises and challenges, and none of us were willing to retreat. The hall vibrated. The walls seemed alive, absorbing the energy of that crowd that had finally freed itself from the chains of fear. The traitorous advisor, now cornered, looked around at the audience for support, but the trust once placed in him crumbled with each beat of my heart. "Truth is relentless," I declared, stepping forward, "and those who try to stifle it are destined to fail. You can try to divide us, but this hall is a testament to the strength of our unity." The murmur of the audience amplified, an echo of firm determination representing a new hope. Each voice became a station connected to the same destiny. The prince, in his noble posture, rose as a symbol of resistance, his words even more intense. "If there are lessons to be learned, let them be about the value of transparency and respect for all inhabitants of this kingdom, not just the blue-blooded nobles." The heat of his words stirred the atmosphere, transforming tension into a powerful incentive. Thus, I knew the moment to act had arrived. Not just our declarations and promises, but a real commitment to establish a new paradigm was needed. With a signal, I asked everyone to unite in a circle around the advisor. Our intertwined hands formed an invisible barrier, a fortress against the tyranny he represented. "Tonight, we reclaim our voice," I cried, feeling each heartbeat echoing in sync with the crowd. "This is a call to each of you, nobles and commoners. The time for silencing suffering is over. Let's rewrite the future together." The advisor tried to break free, but the sharp gaze of the audience held him captive. The indignation that once formed walls now became a shelter, a safe space where truth could flourish. The weight of past lies began to dissipate, making way for something new, a new era of responsibility and collaboration. With the prince's final words, the audience in unison exclaimed, "Freedom!" A call that echoed beyond the walls, resonating in all corners of the kingdom. It was a promise of a future where everyone would have a voice, and that voice would not only be heard, but respected. The energy of the hall contained a power that couldn't be ignored. It echoed through the palace walls and beyond, reaching those who might be lost in darkness. The advisor, realizing his power was irrevocably crumbling, muttered a final protest, but no one heard him anymore. His time was up, and now we were responsible for our own destiny. Gathered around the prince, in the light of an uncertain future, we knew that challenges would still persist. But together, we were an unstoppable force. There was a promise in the air, a shared determination that nothing would ever be the same again. As we left the hall in unity, each step became a declaration. The chains of silence were broken, and the new truth rose like the dawn, illuminating the path. And so we marched towards the unknown, fearless and determined, ready to forge a new world, a world where freedom and justice would be the foundations of our shared heritage. The kingdom now belonged to all of us, and change was a certainty. The march into the unknown was not without internal storms. Each step resonated not only as an act of rebellion, but also as a reflection of who we were before the light of truth. With the palace behind us, the corridors became a labyrinth of emotions, a mix of unbridled hope and deep fear for the uncertain future that awaited us. I could feel the adrenaline pulsing in my veins, anxiety growing with each moment we left the comfort of familiarity. With each new corridor, the echo of our footsteps became a mantra of resistance. "We will be heard," I repeated to myself, trying to convey this determination to those around me. It was then that one of the waitstaff, the shyest among us, leaned into me, her gaze reflecting the same insecurities I felt. "Do you really think we can change anything?" Her voice was almost lost amidst the cacophony of our movements. I looked into her eyes, trying to find the right words. We need to believe, not just in our strength, but in our right to exist beyond the whispers of oppression. It was a stroke of light that needed to spread. We needed to remember that we were more than products of servitude. Our destinies were now in our hands, and that responsibility was both a burden and a privilege. As we crossed the palace gates, a growing crowd began to gather outside. Their faces were illuminated, and their determined gazes held an undeniable shine. Bursts of applause and shouts of freedom filled the air, like a symphony raised in unison. The prince, who was once a mere spectator, now became a leader, raising his hand like a beacon of hope. "Freedom is not given, it is earned," he proclaimed, and our voices joined in a vibrant chorus, draining the indignation that had long been held. The weight of the past began to dissipate, and the population that once observed them from afar was now by our side, courage radiating from their souls. However, weakness was still present, a subtle shadow crouching ahead. We knew the traitorous advisor wouldn't stand idly by, and the forces that once sustained his tyranny would mobilize. In every corner, darkness could be gathering to retaliate. Doubts infiltrated our hopes, but we couldn't allow that fear to dominate us. "We will face any resistance together," I affirmed, addressing the crowd. "For each of us who raised our voice and became visible, we will not choose an individual battle, but a collective one. Change is our inheritance, our right." With these words, a wave of determination swept through us. The scene transformed into an impressive spectacle, each of us forming a shield of resistance and courage. The advisor might be somewhere planning retaliation, but tonight we were one. Thus, the palace that once symbolized our oppression now reverberated with our cries of freedom. The approaching dawn was not just a new day, but the beginning of a new era, where the chains of disunity and fear would no longer find a place. As the crowd advanced, a promising and uncertain future awaited us, and we were ready to face it together, an army of hearts united by truth. Change was imminent, and we had the power and strength to make it a reality.